Welcome to Facing the Moment, brought to you by the Foundation for Self-Leadership. In these episodes, we will address various crises and focus on how to navigate them with abundant fortitude and a bit of hope. As we discuss relevant observations together, we will identify meaningful actions that will generate valuable insights. You can download all episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube.
I welcome our listeners to this episode of Facing the Moment. In this episode, we will explore the complex terrain of loneliness. Loneliness touches individuals of all ages, as well as their families and friends. Loneliness goes beyond the personal. More and more, we are getting to understand loneliness through a relational and even societal lens. I said complex because it is perhaps a manifestation of trauma, loss of meaning, disconnection, and even despair. A lot has been written about it. The twice former U.S. Surgeon General labeled it an epidemic and dedicated the whole book around it in 2020 entitled Together, which I recommend reading. This is a very timely conversation, especially as the world seems to be sinking deep into multiple crises. Yet, here we are, looking for that light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how faint. And to help us find that light, I'm very pleased to be joined today by Sarah Oswald. Sarah, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Tufik.
Pleasure to have you. Sarah is a relational-focused coach who has been trained in many modalities, relational life therapy among them. She is devoted to the art of building thriving communities. As the inaugural executive director of the Relational Life Foundation, she has launched numerous programs and has been hosting a relatively new and very engaging podcast, Facets of Connection. And I was very privileged to have been a guest on its episodes recently. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah cares deeply about helping couples build strong partnerships. And here's a very cool tidbit about Sarah that I learned recently through our conversations. She has officiated more than 100 weddings. Wow. Her deep interests now, which aligns well with the Foundation for Self-Leadership's emerging societal-facing priorities, is to help end the epidemic of loneliness. Welcome again, Sarah. I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to add about you that I haven't mentioned, which would be relevant to our conversation today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here with you. As far as adding anything to this introduction, perhaps I could state that I am also a mother and a wife and someone who is deeply committed to building community around me everywhere I go. And I was joking with you earlier about maybe not being an expert in loneliness because I don't feel like I've experienced it all that much myself. Mainly because I'm so intent on surrounding myself with meaningful connections. But I have been studying it deeply for quite a while now and studying the flip side of how to solve for the lack of connection.
Well,
and so I'm thrilled to be here with you to talk about that.
Well,
it's really important to me.
Thank you for being here and thank you for being humble about this. I know that there are different ways to be experts about any topic or theme. The mere sign of interest and commitment that you've exhibited in our conversations before and the work you're doing to your foundation are very valuable and, would be helpful, I'm sure, to our listeners and to me in particular. So let's start by setting the context if possible.
Great.
When we think of loneliness, we are not necessarily thinking about being alone. Some of us may have experienced loneliness in our private, intimate spaces, and most might not choose to talk about it. So as a coach and as a humanist, as a researcher, how might you describe loneliness to our listeners?
Well, I think you make a really good point that loneliness is distinct from aloneness, while like aloneness can be quite comfortable, yeah, even enjoyable. It's a time to connect with oneself if that relationship is strong. But loneliness would be a source of pain. It can feel like a deep ache, a sense of being unseen or disconnected from others, even when surrounded by people, which I find really fascinating, this concept of being surrounded by others, but still feeling isolated and disconnected.
Really?
One of the things that I thought we could kick off with is looking at why loneliness now? How did this originate? Where did it stem from? How long has our culture been experiencing it? It's actually a global pandemic, epidemic.
Yeah.
It's not just in the States, but it's global. Especially as we look at numbers of teenage depression, anxiety, and even suicide. That's globally higher than it ever has been. So what is happening? Where did this come from? And how far back do we need to look to examine the origins of it? That's fascinating to me.
Well, and we're gonna cover these ideas as we go along, Sarah. Thank you for putting them right front and center. And you started by sharing with us the emotional, psychological, even spiritual signs of loneliness. And I'm thinking a little bit about some other signs that might be there. I'm thinking about cynicism or sarcasm. I'm thinking about vulnerability or retreating from society on one extreme, and perhaps the manifestation of violence on the other. Perhaps disinterest on one side and workaholism on the other. Are these at times traceable, in your opinion, to loneliness besides what you shared with us? And I'm curious also what the effects of loneliness are that may not be easily attributed or obvious.
Yeah, those are great questions. As I was reflecting on this topic over the last few days in particular, it occurred to me that we might say that nearly every mental health condition could be treated with connection. That loneliness might be at the root of a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in our culture. And I was imagining how loneliness might show itself, right? Most obviously, it might express itself as depression, anxiety, social inhibition, shyness. But on a deeper level, we might see it as a loss of willingness to engage with the world around us, a withdrawal, or you might even see it in yourself as like a laziness or a lack of motivation, which can create numbness or hopelessness. So I think there's a lot of symptoms, right? You mentioned violence, workaholism, overeating, right? All the ways that we try to find connection, try to find aliveness. I think loneliness is a lack of aliveness, and that can manifest in so many different ways, right?
Sure. Yeah. There was an article.
And there's a lot of therapists now say that loneliness, I'll back up. That therapists will say that trauma can actually be healed with human connection, meaningful human connection.
Yes.
That has to be part of the traumatic healing. We can't do trauma healing without connection.
Yes. In many of the episodes I already hosted, I heard that term come up a lot, that notion of connectedness as a solution, as a bridge to build, across chasms in many, many different ways within relationships and across society at large. Yeah, Sarah, I think connection seems to be coming up in different circles. I just, recorded a few episodes with guests, and that notion came up as a bridge across chasms within relationships and across society at large. So I agree with you. This might be a something to look into, especially as we discuss this topic. I want to say there was an article this morning in the Washington Post
I saw
citing new
that.
research comparing the state of loneliness among young men to young women. Who from your research and practice appears to be most affected by this epidemic?
Well, as the article actually stated, that the research is showing that younger people, particularly teenagers and young adults, we're seeing a height of loneliness there. We're also seeing it among the elderly, but I don't know how new that is. But what the article stated was that those numbers are not as surprising, but that this new research is showing that men have a higher rate of loneliness. Why do you think that might be?
I'm not really sure. It's a very intriguing observation. We've heard lately, especially through the political environment, how men feel, young men in particular, feel dismissed, feel that they're facing situations that their parents' generations never experienced, right? They feel economically unstable, not self-sufficient economically. They feel there's a climate crisis. But I would think young women would have the same experience. Maybe there is more resilience among certain populations than others. It's hard for me to understand, but it's certainly something worth exploring.
Well, I've got some ideas that stem back to the work of Terry Real, the founder of relational life therapy, that speak to this in a way that I haven't heard other people talking about. I can share more about that a little later on in our conversation, but he likens it back to patriarchy, that our culture lives in this story of going it alone, emphasizing rugged individualism, and that traditionally under patriarchy, the masculine is taught to be dominant over, and how that separates them from their emotions. And what's another theme that I think is important to bring in is that connection to self seems like the heart of what we're talking about. And yes, connection to others, but we've seemed to have lost connection to self. And patriarchy might be to blame for some of that.
I'll be bringing up individualism later. It's certainly an interesting point of analysis, because I think the article says that the reality within the US, for example, is different from some other parts of the world. So maybe there's something there about not just the Western culture, but the US culture, right? Of overstating the importance and the significance of individualism.
Absolutely.
We talked a bit about the signs. I'm curious about the triggers, the common triggers, life developments or events that seem to bring about that state of being, and how people experience the world around us. Might you have something some light to shed on what might trigger this state of being?
Absolutely. So if we look at humanity as a whole and things that most people encounter at one point or another, we have some things that are transitory, right? Like perhaps moving to a new city, or retiring, or experiencing a loss, or groups and having social rejection come out of being a member of a group, right? The scapegoat archetype, for instance. Perhaps chronic illness, right? These are things that all human beings deal with at some level and probably have been dealing with for many, many generations. But I think we would be remiss to not talk about the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which obviously brought widespread isolation and disrupted all social routines, right? Many people found themselves losing the ability and confidence even to connect after these long periods of isolation that we've all experienced collectively. And I've heard this around, that people are more anxious about social interactions than they used to be. What do you think about also mentioning the fact that many of us now work remotely?
Yep.
Another fallout from the pandemic. I mean, it's great. We have a lot more autonomy and flexibility, but even me, who's someone who thrives on connection and community, and I surround myself with it at every chance I get, I go through days where I don't actually see too many other people in person.
Yeah. There's clearly a sense of physical disconnection that's taken over, or at least, that is much more pronounced than it used to be. And there's this whole effect of social media that people often talk about as well.
That's the next one I was going to mention too. Well, the rise of technology in general.
Yes.
We could look all the way back to the late 1800s, or 18th century rather, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, and look there to say, okay, at that point, the world started shifting.
And people go beyond that. When the cities were first formed, the whole notion of being in community shifted, right? Because now you're staying put. You're not going together with a community of people finding the next thing, the next oasis, or what have you. Yeah. So, clearly something happens between stimulus and response, right? The stimulus may activate this loneliness and how it gets internalized and at times take over.
I've been hearing this Viktor Frankl quote quite a bit lately.
You know
so
what?
it's great to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, it's absolutely appropriate. I was reading recently in the Hope for Cynics work by Stanford psychologist Jamil Zeki about hikikomori. I had not heard about that before.
I hadn't either, but I saw it in your notes and looked into it a bit.
Yeah, I was actually embarrassed that I didn't even know about it. And it represents the state of being in total isolation and complete withdrawal from the world, even from the family in the same house, for months at a time. And it seems to have been, a bit more problematic or a crisis level in Japan. 1% of adults across many nations live in that state. This is, of course, an extreme aspect of loneliness. So how does such a state of mind and physical existence, or at least complete retreat, seclusion, how does it take over, in your opinion? How do we make sense of that as therapists, coaches, or individuals focus on supporting individuals or groups or building community?
Well, at its core, I think disconnection begets disconnection. The more withdrawn we become, the more withdrawn the people around us become. And then it becomes harder to engage. I mean, you see this showing up in, I hear about families where siblings haven't spoken to each other in decades. Or in couples where one partner shuts down because they say, oh, this other person's never going to fully get me. And they withdraw, and the other person withdraws. And it's a self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah.
Can you say a little more about this phenomena of hikikomori?
Well, it's like cynicism takes a whole new level of control over us, that we sink into hopelessness. And we see no more meaning and value in the world outside. I mean, besides connection, there's always, as you know, the struggle for meaning, the search, incessant search for meaning. And I believe that's part of what's missing. The connection is missing, and the meaning is somehow missing, dismissed, forgotten, not tasting, as good as it tasted before.
But if you say that there is this inherent search for meaning, how can you make sense of someone who goes into isolation on purpose for months, years on end?
Well,
How do you make sense of that?
maybe they give meaning to what they're experiencing, right? If they're playing video games or writing or sleeping, they justify. We all justify the state of being, and sometimes we basically sink into a depressive mode where we lose touch with meaning, with justification, with the maybe even the reason to live, right? And that becomes a very serious effect, an outcome of loneliness. I mean, you talked about disconnect begets disconnect. It begs the question of the flip side of that. Does connection beget connection?
I would say so in my personal experience. And I know personally, when I start to feel that disconnection or lack of, I mean, social connection brings me joy. So if I have a lack of it, I do notice I dip into a little bit of a depression, but that is my cue to seek out more community. But I'm on the far other end of that spectrum, personally.
Well, so we have a lot to learn from you.
Connected person. I seek and build community everywhere I go.
Yeah.
So I can't say that I am someone who has experienced the depths of loneliness, but I have had it on my sights for a long time. For instance, okay, I'm just going to give you a few examples. I worked with a startup for a number of years called Silver Nest that was helping end the epidemic of loneliness in baby boomers and retirees, many of whom in this country, in the United States, live alone in houses, right? This generation actually could afford to buy homes, but very few of them have more than $50,000 saved for retirement. And so this company was helping pair them with housemates to address their financial, but more so to address the negative health impacts that loneliness can bring. And living alone is one of them. Just living alone, unpartnered. The rates of heart attack, stroke, and this list goes on and on. Dementia. All these health issues come up. Turns out that loneliness is as dangerous for our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yep. So, clearly there's a physical effect.
There's
health
most
effect.
certainly physical health effects.
Yeah.
A few other striking findings, that loneliness increases the risk of premature death by nearly 30%. And those with poor social relationships have a greater risk of stroke, heart disease, depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, dementia, high blood pressure, obesity, and weakened immune function.
Wow.
That blows me away. That
Yeah.
the mortality impact of loneliness is, as I said, equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, greater than the mortality impact of obesity or sedentary living.
Yeah.
What?
Shocking and heartbreaking. And
Both.
it reminds me that we need to be able to get that information to teachers and physicians and parents and other caretakers, because it's not obvious, right? It's not common knowledge, right? People are writing about it and researching it, and you're sharing what you've learned and are learning about it. We need to do more to promote the need to address that issue, and the effect is not simply on the person. I'd like to kind of take a look at families and classrooms. How does chronic loneliness experienced by one member of such circles show up for the whole system? I mean, how does it affect the interactions, the mood, the relational dimension, if you wish, in that system? How? What can you tell us about
that? Absolutely. The mood, you say. Yeah, that if one person in the family system or in the classroom system is experiencing these deeper levels of loneliness, that it can erode relationships across families and couples and student bodies, leading to increased conflict, right? Obviously, emotional distance, but even breakdowns in communication, like lonely students may struggle academically and socially, which impacts the entire learning environment, right? Or we talked about families, how siblings might wall off from each other, or maybe a kid says, I don't want to talk to my parent forever, and they go for the rest of their lives without speaking. I get that there are relational traumas that can happen that make actions like that feel justified. But I also think that that viewpoint is a little narrow, and perhaps I haven't experienced the worst of it to know personally what that could be like. But family is family. We only get one. Yeah, I always say we can't make new old friends. And so I hold my oldest friendships so close to my heart because I can't go out in the world and make a new friend who I've known since I was 1 year old. Yeah. Same is true for family.
Yeah.
Blood is blood.
There's certainly truth to that. It's, I can't sit here certainly and judge situations where there is trauma within family, there is harassment, there is abandonment, there is,
right.
Other form of abuse.
Absolutely.
So we cannot take our own experience, as privileged as it may be or not,
That's right.
and anticipate others to experience the same. But I get you. I fully understand the philosophy behind what you're saying. It's much easier to hold on to what you have than to have to build new ones. Yet connection is connection, right? I mean, if we're open to it and we're curious about it and we're willing to learn from these new interactions, it might be an invitation for us to keep our ears, eyes, mind open to where we might establish these new relationships.
I think there's two sides to this coin, and this is just illuminating in my mind as you're speaking about it. But you say we can't easily go out and build those new connections. We can't go and find new family. And maybe there's some truth to that, right? We can't go find a new blood parent, right? And perhaps the trauma with our own family of origin is so deep that rebuilding those relationships is actually harder than going out and building a new intimate relationship. And the flip side to this coin that I have always been struck by since I was a little girl is how meaningful new connections can actually be. I go through the world talking to people that I meet everywhere I go. And those interactions of new strangers, I don't like the word strangers. I say every person I don't know is just a friend I haven't met yet. Yeah.
Beautiful.
People who are strangers out there, like I can have a meaningful interaction with the person who's checking me out at the grocery store. And those interactions light me up. They're the things that keep me feeling uplifted throughout my day. And I also think that the world is full of wonderful human beings. There is no shortage of meaningful connections to be had out there. Not
That's
just
beautiful.
in passing connections, but in ones that we can make today, right? Tufik, you and I have become close friends. Yeah, over the last 5 years, but yet we've never met in person. And so I think there is, to say that those connections are harder to build when they're new is also a fallacy, because there is so much beauty out there to be experienced.
I'm with you. I share your perspective. I share your spirit of seeing connections as a gift that we can make as human beings. Yet I have to intellectually make this point that what comes easy for one person, what may be more natural for one person may not be for the other, right? We all have this common gift of humanity, you know, that we all experience dignity, or we feel that it's being attacked in some cases, and we feel pain from that. We all experience the same type of needs, if you wish, if you think of the Maslow's or some other models about what needs are. Yeah, we approach things differently, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? The experience we live, the generations that have come before us, and what legacy they gave us affect how we approach things. And it's good for us to learn from each other. There's a lot from me to learn from you. And it's then up to me to take what I learn and see, you know, what skills can I develop? Which aspects of me can I refine? Which injuries that I carry with I need to heal in order for me to do that. So it's more complex than that. And I love your disposition and your perspective of life. And I too see my family bigger than my own blood family, right? There's the human family, you know, there's the organizational family I live in. There's the neighborhood family I live with, right? So I look at them from that perspective. Yeah, we have to enter life with some sense of discernment as well.
Of course we do. Yeah, not every connection is one that we should throw ourselves into. That's wise. And I think I really want to pause on what you just said about the privilege or the disposition that I'm coming to the table with here. I get that it's not easy for everybody to do what I just talked about doing. And the only part of me that really knows that on a personal level is that I was so painfully shy as a child. I was so incredibly scared of being seen. Until I was about 10, I don't think I talked to more than a handful of friends. Yeah. So I want to make sure that that's heard. I get that what I just said is not easy for anyone to just jump up and do. But I want to talk for a moment about the human, the neuroscience of connection. Yeah, like human beings are literally wired for this stuff. In fact, all mammals are. Yeah. And I'll speak just a little bit about this because I know neuroscience is much more commonly understood these days across many different groups of people.
Or misunderstood, depending on...
Perhaps.
Yes.
And perhaps. And the information on it can evolve so quickly. The research is evolving very rapidly right now. We're learning so much more about our brains. So what I'll share here is a really simplified version just to speak at a level that anyone can understand. But human beings are mammals. All mammals have an emotional center of our brain called the limbic system. And it helps us to tune in to other people's feelings and intentions. This is the part of our brain that processes attachment and belonging, but it also is the part of our brain that experiences pain of separation and loneliness. Also, in our brains, we have something called mirror neurons, and these are firing off all the time when we are around others. I wonder what happens to our mirror neurons when we're alone, but these specialized brain cells allow me to mirror reflect the emotions and actions and intentions of the people around me. They're what help me feel empathy and help me understand another person's experience, almost as if I'm living it myself. What happens to mirror neurons in isolation? There's a paper for you. I'm curious.
Yeah. Well,
this and then is you may have, sorry, I'll stop there. I have more to say, but what were you gonna?
No, I was gonna say this is why Dan Siegel talks about going from a me to a we, combining the me and the we, because this is how we're supposed to evolve, right? So it's a learning process. Yes. It's a path of evolution. that all of us, are pursuing, whether we know it or not, right? But I'd like to widen the aperture of this lens a bit.
Okay.
And go from the individual a little bit to the communal, to the society.
Great.
Right? I have joined many in referring to loneliness as a crisis, as a public health crisis, and you made that very clear early on. I'd like to hear your views about what that looks like at that level, not just in numbers, because the numbers exist, the percentages exist, but what does it look like societally when we have such a crisis? When we talked about the pandemic, we had a sense of what that meant, right? Families broken, people's lives lost, long COVID, fatigue and health issues lingering. What does the public health of loneliness look like from a societal point of view? Might you share a few thoughts on that?
Yeah, and what I can share are just thoughts of my own. Yeah, I could go back and list statistics, but as you said, those are out there. And as I reflect upon your question, just taking it in, what came up for me was connection to self, first and foremost. And, globally, with the access to the internet being so global at this point, we have the ability to connect with anyone. And yet those interactions, I would dare to say, are almost always lacking some kind of soul fulfillment. Yeah. And we've also seen a rise in consumerism. Yeah, globalization is a rise in consumerism in some ways. And consumerism could be another grab at trying to find meaning. Yeah. Shopaholics. Just another symptom of what loneliness could be causing. Trying to find connection. And when I talk about connection with self, we've also lost our connection to our planet, right? And so when you think about, when I'm zooming out now to think about it culturally and globally, we treat our planet as a resource. Yeah. And if there's so much pain and suffering right now on the planet, right now more than I've experienced in my lifetime, or at least that I've been aware of, that I actually find it tough sometimes to sit in my experience, making it much more tempting to disassociate, to turn my attention to my small world inside my home, or go shopping, because that'll stop my from thinking about something. But the pain of sitting in our experience right now, if we're treating our earth the way we're treating our earth, we are disconnected from the very thing that actually gives us life.
Yeah.
So yes, that might show up as loneliness culturally, but I think it stems back to being disconnected from ourselves, which is ultimately the biggest loss.
Yeah. I mean, I hear these cultural forces that you referred to. Earlier on, you mentioned individualism, patriarchy. Now you mentioned consumerism, a disconnect from the natural environment. And we all know the planet doesn't really care. The planet is the planet. It's how we interact
will go on
with
living
it. Exactly.
without us.
Yes, it's how we can maintain, sustain certain balance in our interaction with it that matters. Whether these resources will become, exactly, we're together, right? We're part of it. And that's why many indigenous communities are much more connected with the land, than we are, unfortunately. And these issues that you referred to early on, the shopping and the collecting of things around us that would give us some solace, maybe it's just a way to numb the pain,
Yeah.
It's a way to numb the pain, because someone said, I can't remember if it's Ram Dass or someone else, wherever you go, there you are, right? You go buy a new car and you're excited. You think it's going to make a difference in your life. And then, a week or two later, you're used to it and you sink back into whatever situation you haven't resolved.
Of course.
So loneliness is maybe a call for us to address what needs to be resolved, not only individually and within families, but societally, because yes, there's a connection to self, and the multiplier effect of that is maybe losing connection to humanity, losing connection to each other, losing connection to what makes us who we are and to the meaning that we assign to life and to being here at this moment. So it's a very big question that we're not going to resolve. But I appreciate you putting these issues out there for us to get greater clarity on the seriousness of this issue. I want to tell you what's of interest to me in this moment, as I'm mentioning connection to self and to people around us. I'm also thinking about connection to generations that preceded us, right? I'm curious about experiences and narratives that cross from one generation to the next. As an example, if one family's emotional intimacy or connection is not a common characteristic, would that transmit into next generation and maybe become more extreme? Have you seen that in your research and your practice? Is it something that we need to be thinking about?
I'm not sure if I caught the thing that you said. What can you repeat that
Yes,
question?
A generational is
like a quality that existed in previous generations, if that's being passed down.
Yes, an attitude, the perspectives, a quality of connection, a quality of emotional intimacy, a quality of care. There are a number of unfortunate situations that keep repeating from one generation to the other. We get stuck in these cycles.
Yes.
So is loneliness also part of that cycle in some fashion, and it gets worse and worse from generation to generation?
Well, I think the first answer is yes. We do know that our genes carry the trauma from previous generations, but I don't think it has to perpetuate in cycles. Perhaps at some point it gets bad enough that someone makes a change to say, I'm going to drastically shift this for my family. But when you brought up generations past, what occurred to me is our lack of connection to future generations. Yeah, the way that we are using our planet disconnects us from generations to come, because we are not leaving an inhabitable planet for them. And I imagine that also disconnects us from previous generations. And what happens when we disconnect from past and future? Yes, there is something great about living right in the present moment. And I would say that that's an antidote to loneliness. That's a whole other thread. But when we don't have connection to the generations, past and future, we're in trouble.
We break the continuity of time. And there is a value in learning from the past and preparing for the future, right? While living in the moment. I think people who overemphasize the now, and I have a lot of respect for those who've written about the power of now and here and now. It's critical because that's all we have, because in a moment, the now is now the past and the future is still an illusion. I get that. Yet I look at time very differently, and I see that arrow that's connected. So that there's this connection to time as well that we didn't talk about. And we need to move on, because I do not want to give the listeners the impression that it's all dark and gloomy and hopeless. There's a lot of hope. And you talked about connection and joy. So let's think about solutions, answers, possibilities ahead, ways to heal.
Great. I love that you're keeping us on track to get there, because it's so
that's
important.
Critical to me. Insights and action is part of this podcast. We define the crisis, we talk about it, we try to understand how it's interpreted, but we need to figure out how to navigate. So where do we
I
start?
could talk about this with you all day.
Well, I have to bring you back,
Yes.
So where do we start to address loneliness? Is there a small step that one can take to reestablish that relationship with self, to loosen the grip of not being seen, not being heard, not being wanted?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. And I'll just sort of name them quickly, knowing that each one of these line items could have a whole other conversation stem out of it. But I think that naming isolation and loneliness can reduce shame around it, right? There's a stigma associated with being lonely. And I think we need to start talking about it, just like we're doing here, that it's not one or two people in our community, but it's many, maybe 50% are experiencing this. So we need to open the door to start talking about it and seeking support, making sure that seeking support feels normal and something that our culture is willing to talk about. But going back to where I was starting this conversation, right, I think it points to some of the other solutions. First and foremost, slowing down. We live in a really fast-paced culture. Slowing down to connect with ourselves. I've developed a practice of putting one hand on my heart and another on my belly and just saying, hi, I see you there. Yeah. And listening. I'm giving and receiving with myself. What are you longing for right now? And can I offer myself the nurture and connection that I might be seeking for out there in the world around me? I think it starts here, slowing down. Yeah. Maybe that involves stepping away from technology, taking time off social media, off the internet, leaving your phone at home and getting out into nature. Yeah, I think being in nature is a solve for this, a balm for the soul. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Helping remember ourselves as part of the earth, I think, is part of this healing. And then also recognizing our essential worth and value as human beings.
Yes.
Yeah? This goes back to the concept of patriarchy and dominance and power over, which is something relational life therapy talks about quite a bit, which is the therapeutic modality that Relational Life Foundation is based on. But every single human being on this planet has the same essential worth and value, and that it's a fallacy that anyone could have more or less worth than anyone else. And if we can hold that, I think if you really feel that in your being, that it makes it possible to go into the world around you and make connections, simple ones, perhaps, even simple ones, I mean. To renounce the dominance over culture means that every single person around you is as a potential dear friend. And yeah, it still takes vulnerability, which is risky for many. That feels risky.
Sure.
To take the risk of inviting someone to go to tea with you.
Yeah. The risk of being rejected.
The risk of being rejected. Yeah, the risk of sharing something that's difficult for you. I find, just personally, here I am again in my very connected self, I find that if I tell someone, hey, I really like you, I'd like to be friends with you, do you want to go take a hike with me? That they actually feel lit up by that. And yeah, it might have felt risky at one point to say, I like you. Yeah. Just to someone that I'm just getting to know. But I find that when I can take that risk, it's usually met with a lot of love and friendliness on the other side. People feel appreciated. And when people around me feel appreciated, I get more of that coming back toward me.
Beautiful. Well, I appreciate that. You shared a lot of, ways that we can start working on this challenge for ourselves, right?
Mhm.
Now I want to figure out how we can help someone who is in the throes of loneliness. What can we do? And I know sometimes the doing does not help. So I ask, how can we be in their
Great.
presence? How might we show up for that
Great.
someone?
Yeah, because as we said earlier, you can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. So how is it not about doing? Yeah. I have a neighbor. She is almost 90. She's housebound. And she's become a really dear friend of mine. I go over to her place quite a bit. But I could think I'm doing her a service if I just do favors for her or drop by with food or maybe, weed her garden. But what seems to be the most valuable is actually pulling up a chair and inviting her to sit down and talk with me and being present for that, not feeling like I have somewhere better to be or that I'm doing her a favor, but to actually enjoy her stories and her presence. And how does my being show her that she is valuable as a human being herself and not just something that I think I should be doing, but I actually really enjoy spending time with her, so that helps. But
So
I love that you're
being
asking
present.
this, like
Yeah.
presence, but
Being
also like
present.
the quality of your beingness.
Yeah.
Being willing to slow down and just feel rather than always doing, which is a lot of what our culture tells us to do.
And listening to the other
Well,
person,
yes.
creating space
Mm.
so the other person can also feel present
That's right.
and heard and not judged, right? Because you mentioned the stigma before, and that's really part of it. Yeah. I don't remember the name of the book, nor I'm embarrassed to blank on the name of the author who wrote another book called The Courage to Teach. And he was a dean at a college, and he was a Quaker, at least, in the Quaker tradition. And he felt a very strong pull toward loneliness and depression for a while, that he actually became isolated. And people would come and bring him food and ask him questions. And out of the, dozens of people who came to help, the one he appreciated the most was the one who came, said nothing, pulled a container of warm water and washed his feet. I mean, it's so powerful when you say nothing, when your presence as a human being in the presence of pain itself provides connection. So there is that physical presence has this ability to go beyond the physical engagement and create an emotional connection. So I want to go back to the societal for a moment, Sarah, if I may, because sometimes I feel that the systems that have been built over time around us, be they educational, economic, health systems, in some ways, they may have contributed to and worsened the condition of loneliness, in some fashion at least. Do you see that? And if so, what are we to do about it? I know it's a big question, but I'm curious.
It's a huge question
about your thoughts.
I don't know that I have the right answer here, Tawfiq. But I think it goes back to some of the stuff that we were just talking about of extending kindness, challenging the systems around us. One thing that really stands out as you speak that is I had a recent experience where I got to visit prison inmates who were graduating from a relational leadership program. And that is a system that dehumanizes and isolates.
Or
terribly so. As the more I learned about it, the sicker I became. And yet I met these men who had studied this relational leadership program, and they were there to graduate. So it was a peak experience for them. But I was so struck by the resilience of the human spirit. And if they can get up out of bed each morning and live their lives like it's beautiful, then that's something we can take on too. Because that could be me in that situation. It was just the fact that I was born into a different family than they were. That could be me. And we have more in common as human beings than we do differences.
Yeah, and we have to, keep reminding ourselves of that. And I appreciate what you said about we have to keep, quote unquote, resisting systems that we believe are contributing to loneliness, to dehumanizing, to attacking human dignity, to removing what binds us and creating, artificial lines of separation. Not to take away from people's need to be responsible toward each other and doing what their obligation is. We're not giving people an out there, but we're saying at the core of being who we are, there is something that our systems are missing. Many of our systems, maybe not all. And that's something that we need to be cognizant of. So let me ask you this. I know we're approaching the end of this engaging conversation together. If someone listening today is struggling with the rip currents of loneliness, unsure that things might improve ahead, which is sometimes part of the concern, that we don't see that light at the end of the tunnel that I referred to earlier, how would you help them? What would you tell them? What would you tell a person struggling by association?
Struggling by association to someone else who's experiencing loneliness?
Who's in yes.
Well, there's a lot of support out there. I know that both you and I run organizations that provide support for relational support, connection with self, that is sliding scale and free and available to many. But right in your own community, I would start by connecting with the people who are most closely in proximity to you. Yeah. And then within that community, searching out gatherings, searching out groups of people who are getting together with the intention of making meaningful contact. Because it's out there. In every single community, it's out there. And there might be a bit of a hump to get over if it feels really scary to put yourself in a new social setting that way. But it's available. And often those communities are so welcoming that I highly encourage you to push yourself and that loved one who's experiencing loneliness out the door and doing something outside your comfort zone.
Thank you for that. So one last question before I close, and maybe you can be brief. What can loneliness teach us, if anything? I mean, because we see it as a crisis, and we know that in every crisis there are abundant lessons if we're willing to look for them. What can loneliness teach us?
For starters, I think it teaches us about our need for connection to be healthy. They can teach us to be more self-aware, right? Someone who's lonely has a lot of time on their hands. Perhaps that's not necessarily true, but to turn towards self-awareness. And it can teach us about the importance of community. I think it can be a catalyst for personal growth and deeper relationships, both with ourselves and with other people around us.
Right.
Because it can be used as an opportunity to push yourself into deeper connection. If we're clever, right? If we're clever and resourceful, that stuff is available.
Yeah, and willing. It's also about willing. As you know from people you coach, if they're not willing, it's a missed opportunity. Yeah. Listen, my heart breaks for those who are experiencing loneliness, and I know it lives in our spaces. And what I'm hearing from you is, instead of pushing it away, we first are invited to observe and listen closely, understand.
That's right.
Its multiple causes and aspects. Be there for those who struggle with it, And being there with deep care and empathy is often all that is needed. Like we said, presence. Thank you for this very compassionate and insightful conversation, Sarah. You've been,
thank you.
You've been very engaging, creative in your thoughts, open, sharing your own story. You've helped us understand loneliness, but not only that, perhaps even more importantly, explore ways to meet it and transform it within ourselves and with others. I know there's a large window of possibilities. The window may be heavy or bulky, and it may require patience and persistence to open it. Once open, however, I believe it will invite us to enjoy a little sunshine and maybe more coming vistas. So I want to give you the final word, and I want to ask you, what gives you hope and resilience in this moment?
Great. Thank you. There's this quote that stands out to me from the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. It was in his book called Together. And I think it's a great question to end with. He wrote, "How do we shift the balance of our lives from being driven by fear to being fueled by love?" Yeah. Love and fear. How do we take on love? When our inner light dims, right? I believe we all have this pilot light inside of us. And sometimes that pilot light gets blown out. And that's when we need to rely on one another. That's when you turn to your neighbor and ask for a light. It's our responsibility to help one another keep our pilot lights lit. And then once it's lit, it's our responsibility to go out in the world and share.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah. In the language of IFS, that light is always there, but it may be covered by rubble. That's self-leadership, right? That's the
self-leadership
resource of wisdom that we all carry and we're all given at some point. Listen, I appreciate your time, Sarah, as always, and our conversation.
Same to you.
Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure to chat with you. And I have a whole list of books we can put on the notes for this episode, if that's useful to people.
Absolutely. Happy to share.
Great. Thanks so much, Tufi.
Take good care.
You too.
Thanks for listening. Facing the Moment is an independent production of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, a nonprofit committed to bringing emotional, relational, and societal healing and well-being to a world in need. Learn more at foundationifs.org. You can download this and all other episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Until the next episode, may we all keep facing the moment with grit and grace.